Hi, I'm Emma Barker-Bonimo, Senior Editor at Time, and I'm joined today by Sal Khan, educator and founder of Khan Academy. Welcome to Time 100 Talks, Sal.
Great to be here, Emma.
So in March, as school districts began to move towards distance learning models, Khan Academy was already implementing sample study schedules for different grade levels and other support systems for parents and teachers. You've said that you pulled together a war room very early in the process, even in February, to solve problems for teachers and parents. What were the most pressing issues for you to solve in those early days?
Yeah, we first caught wind that this might become a thing when we started seeing some of our usage spike in Asia. And we got one letter in particular, I remember, from a teacher in South Korea saying that how they were leaning on Khan Academy through their school closures. And that was the first time it dawned on us that, wow, how wild is that? A whole country closing down schools because of this virus. And then as you got into early March, it started to become increasingly possible that it could happen in the US. And that's where we realized, it's one of those moments where you look left and you look right and you say, I guess this is us. Because people are going to need something that's accessible, that works at home, that works in schools, that covers many subjects and grades, that's trusted, that's accessible, that's available on cell phones, tablets, computers, that's free, ideally. So above and beyond the content that we've been working on for many years across subjects and grades, we realized that parents are going to need ways to structure the day. They were feeling overwhelmed. When my kids are not going to school as of next week, how does that work? What does the day look like? So we put out these daily schedules for kids of different ages, not just how to use Khan Academy for different subjects, but also how do you make sure they're getting enough playtime? How do you make sure they're getting enough relaxation, time with family? Then we started, when it became clear that the school closures were going to be through the end of the year, we put out learning plans. We also put out learning plans for the summer. How do you leverage the summer to keep learning or to make up any learning loss you might have had? And then as we were going into this coming school year, and early in the summer, we assumed that this coming school year might be normal, but we said even if it is normal, kids are going to show up with huge gaps. And so we created what we call Get Ready for Grade Level courses on Khan Academy. We've always had the various grade level courses, but we've seen teachers have a lot of positive gains with students when they're able to back students up to really basic prerequisites and make sure that they had a strong foundation up into the grade level. So we started creating those courses, and we just launched them actually midsummer. And then obviously now it's becoming increasingly clear that this coming back to school is in most places going to continue to be distance, and this could last well into this coming school year. And so we're continuing to just revamp the learning plans, the calendars. We're putting more supports out for teachers and parents on webinars on how they can run this stuff. And we're trying to put out as many views as we can about what does good distance look like in this crisis.
I know you're in contact with a lot of school district leaders around the country. What are some of the most innovative and impactful approaches you've heard from educators to keep students learning in hybrid or totally remote environments?
Yeah, so the best practice that we're seeing is, I pick on math, but this could translate to many subjects. But let's say in math, clearly no longer have 5 1-hour periods a day to work with kids. And so the best practice we've seen is, and once again, this is predicated on having internet access and having an environment at home. And those are very hard questions right now. But assuming this kids have some access to devices, some access to internet, for them to do some daily practice on Khan Academy, 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, depending on their age level. And that can be personalized so that they work on exactly in kind of their zone of proximal development. And that they should have at least 2 to 3 synchronous sessions over video conference with their teachers. Now, the difference is 55 minutes or an hour don't work well on video conference. And especially if it's, the teacher lecturing to students, it does not work well. One could argue it's not even optimal for in-person. But when you're together, or when you're on video conference, it's key that the teachers pull the students out of the screen, so to speak. So to kind of cold call them, make sure that you're asking every student's opinions, make it much more about group problem solving. Instead of giving a lecture, give an interesting problem for the kids to work on initially by themselves and put them into groups for them to work on together. They can go into virtual breakout sessions. And so we've seen the teachers that have done that have actually been able to keep their kids learning quite well. That combination of asynchronous on Khan Academy and then synchronous using video conferencing. Above and beyond that, there's a bit of a side effort that I've been doing. It's not officially part of Khan Academy, but I've been doing it on the side. I hope it becomes part of Khan Academy in the future. It's called schoolhouse.world. And we've started piloting with the school district, Long Beach in Southern California. And this is a way that the students who need tutoring, live tutoring, any teacher in the Long Beach example can volunteer to tutor any student in the district. And they're doing these group tutoring sessions. So it's this matchmaking between students who need live help and any teacher in the district who's able to provide that live help in a tutoring session. And we're also doing a pilot where we're opening that up to the broader world. Any kid in the world who needs help, and there's vetting involved, any teacher or volunteer, and we vet them, that they can run a group tutoring session, can do that as well. So we think that's going to be an interesting backstop for in a lot of places where they're not able to provide as many synchronous supports as we'd like.
You mentioned that 55-minute, hour-long classes, you're now thinking may not even be, a goal or good practice in person. Has this moment shifted your thinking about education or broader education in any way?
It's accelerated a lot of what was probably already happening more slowly. A lot of what we've always talked about at Khan Academy is that learning should not be bound by time or space. That clearly is a necessity in the COVID world, that it's not bound by time or space. A lot of what we've talked about is personalization of learning, that the reason why a lot of kids have trouble with a lot of subjects, but especially math and science, isn't their innate abilities, because they accumulate gaps. They get an 80% on one test, so they did miss 20%. They get a 70% on another test, they miss 30%. And those gaps accumulate over time. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in an algebra class or a physics class and nothing makes sense. But it's because you didn't learn decimals well, or you didn't learn negative numbers well. And so personalization, allowing students to learn at their own time and pace, has been one of our pillars. And obviously that becomes even more important in this COVID world, where some kids are accumulating pretty significant gaps now while other kids are continuing to learn. Another, I guess you could say, principle that we've been talking about for many years now, but becomes even more important in the COVID world, is making, when human beings get together, and that could be in person or over video conference, to make it as human and as interactive as possible. So even pre-COVID, what we saw the best practice in classrooms and what we advocated for is don't lecture. Use class time to do problem solving. You could have some kids work at their own time and pace, and then the teacher can look at a dashboard and say, okay, those 5 kids are having trouble with this skill. Let me take them aside. Maybe they're having trouble academically. Maybe they need a pep talk. Maybe they need to be motivated in some way to do that. If a lot of the kids are at pace, then do a Socratic dialogue, do an interesting project. But everything in the classroom, when humans get together, should be about human interaction. It should not be about, fingers on your lips and listen to the adult for the full hour. All of that becomes that much more important in this COVID world, where, as we mentioned, any of us of any age, to sit 55 minutes or an hour listening to a lecture on Zoom, that might as well be a video. And even as a video, I wouldn't recommend a 60-minute video unless it's pretty well produced. I would chunk it up. But it's all about driving interaction. And I say the last piece is this notion of competency-based learning. Traditional transcripts or grades or credits is based on how much time you spend in a seat for the most part. In college, they literally call it credit hours. It should instead be based on the outcome. So regardless of where and how long it took you to learn, did you learn the algebra or the English or the American history at a level that we could say that is true competency? So those have all been pre-COVID points of view, but they've all become really necessities now in this COVID world, especially if this lasts for another year.
Many parents have struggled with the switch to in-home instruction and having to guide their children through this kind of remote learning. You're a dad yourself. How have you been handling that? What are the biggest lessons you've learned, and what would you say to a parent who's worried about having to deal with that come the fall?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I'm a dad. I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Our family has been lucky on many levels going through this crisis. The school that my children go to, it's a school that I helped start. It's called Khan Lab School, and that school, it's a physical school, but it was always focused on teachers as guides and mentors, and really helping kids kind of develop their own agency. So that school has done a really good job, and I can't take a lot of credit for it. It's really the teachers and the administration there. Literally within 2 days, they were completely, they didn't miss a beat. they had already developed a lot of the skills in the students, and so the students were able to navigate it on their own, and that the teachers are also very tech savvy and have been really incredible supporting the kids, doing goal setting with the kids on Zoom and whatever else while they did a lot of asynchronous work. And then on top of that, I have, my mother-in-law lives with us, my wife, she's a physician, but she's been able to be at home 2 days a week. And obviously my job, there's a lot going on, but it has some flexibility in it. I get to do work virtually. So that's all been blessings. But even then, as you can imagine, it's been stressful in our house. So I could imagine in many other houses that didn't have all of these supports, far more stressful. And what I remind everyone, I remind myself, I remind my wife, and I remind any family who asks is, remember, this is a pandemic. And the number one thing is your kind of the basics. And, one of the basics, obviously, you need the economics, the food, the shelter, but you also need your mental health. And so the last thing that any family needs right now is to put more pressure on themselves or to be feeling inadequate, because that pressure and that stress is just going to translate into the kids. And if the kids feel stress and anxiety, then the learning is going to be a lot harder. And the best way to do that is to say, look, no one is fully replicating school during COVID right now. And so that shouldn't be the aspiration. That's an expectation that will cause stress. The important thing is focus on the basics, and they are math, reading, and writing. If your child or your children can keep working on those things, and depending on the age of the student, 20, 30, 40 minutes a week per subject area, that only amounts to about 2 hours a day. They're going to be just fine. And the tools are there. In math, you have Khan Academy. And depending on the age level and reading and writing, we have Khan Academy. We have things like our SAT prep, and we have early learning things. But you can also just have reading lists, books, and there's many of them. We've published a few during COVID for different kids of different age groups, and have the kids read, have a conversation about it at lunch, have the kids write about interesting topics, put it on Medium, put it on a blog post someplace, and have the family, send it out to the family. If your children do those three things, which is literally about 2 hours a day, they're going to do just fine academically. Those skills aren't going to atrophy. And then on top of that, make sure that they get the socialization. The ideal socialization is some type of in-person socialization that's COVID safe. What we're doing is, a small group of families that we know are taking proper precautions. We are, getting, one or two families together in a backyard with masks on, or at a local park. And we're doing that pretty regularly to make sure our kids, and frankly, us as adults, are getting the socialization and that human connection that's so important. But if you do those things, I think, considering the circumstances, you'll be fine.
You mentioned some gaps that can develop in learning for kids. The move to distance learning has made the digital divide even more apparent. Millions of kids don't have broadband access, even in America. How are you thinking about reaching those kids going forward?
Yeah, this is, I think, the central question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I wish I could give a more optimistic answer about what the crisis is doing, but it's putting inequity in starker relief. As you mentioned, even even in the US, a lot of our school districts, 20-30% of the kids didn't have internet access when the crisis started. The school districts, many school districts, have been doing heroic efforts to get internet access and get devices in families. But even there, New York City, I think, distributed close to 300,000 laptops, Los Angeles close to 200,000, Miami did a similar number. Even in those circumstances, they're still not able to engage all the students. You can imagine, even when you have physical school, there's some subset of kids that are just disengaged for various reasons. It could be just other contextual things in their life. Now that the kids are at home, even when they've distributed laptops and things like that, they might be sharing one computer with the entire family. There might be many people living in the house, or maybe the parents have to work, they're essential workers. And so there isn't the parent support at home. And so for whatever reason, and people are still learning, 5-10% of the population of a lot of districts, they've just kind of fallen off. So that's going to be a major issue when we come back, on how do we get these kids back up to speed. And you can imagine these were the kids that were already behind pre-COVID, and so how do you make up for all of that that's been going on? But at our level, we're still a relatively small nonprofit. We do what we can, obviously, to advocate, talk to the telecom carriers. We're close partners. We've partnered with folks like AT&T and Comcast, and they're doing really great work. trying to get, bridge the digital divide. But we're using our soapbox as much as possible. Say, look, we're going to create the content, the software, the tools for teachers, for families, for students, but they do need access. And so we're doing whatever we can to advocate for it.
Does that mean, asking telecom companies to provide it for free to certain families, or what kind of advocacy are you doing?
Yeah, it's really just trying to convince whoever we can. We're signatories. Common Sense Media has been doing an effort to try to get internet access more broadly accessible. The telecom companies are actually, they are doing the right thing, which is, and I think no one had to tell them, is that during the crisis they all I think had these kind of lower cost internet solutions for lower income families. They always had that. I know Comcast, for example, had Internet Essentials, which was $10 a month, but my understanding is over the course of the crisis, they've made all of those things free, which is the right thing to do. And, I'm not a lobbyist. I've never actually lobbied for legislation, but just the back of the envelope with these various stimulus packages, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, my back of the envelope, you could get internet connection and a device to practically every family in this country for several tens of billions. So, 10 or $20 billion, which obviously is a large number for any individual. But when you think on the scale of government and we think about $1 trillion stimulus package, 20 billion is what, 2% of that. So, and that has not just academic benefits, that has economic benefits. Families can do remote work, they can look for jobs. And it has, frankly, mental health benefits when, what would any of us do if we're not able to connect with friends and family over video conference right now?
As some businesses reopen and parents return to their workplaces, it's becoming more and more clear that many families rely on schools not only for education, but also for childcare when they go back to work. Khan Academy has kind of separated those two by being a more remote educational system. Do you think that's a problem in the American education system?
Well, it is an important function of schools. I mean, it's to educate, and it's not just to educate, not just to kind of give credit and credentials. There's a socialization component of education, which it's not explicitly stated in the standards. Like, this year kids will learn to resolve crisis, or deal with bullying or whatever. But we all know that's part of the in-person physical school process. And then of course there's childcare. If families that are working, which are most families with both parents or one parent working, or the only parent working, you need the school system. And this goes back to your inequity crisis. I think the inequity is getting a little bit worse now, or a lot worse, because affluent parents, one, they tend to have more flexible jobs. I mean, I get to work from home. I'm in our bedroom walk-in closet right now. This is actually where Khan Academy all started. My kids are probably about 30 feet that way. And so I can still support them to some degree. Middle income or affluent families might be able to get other supports. They might be able to hire tutors, or increasingly people are talking about these pods, these pod leaders that people can set up. I think middle class and upper middle class and affluent families also have, frankly, just access to more open space. Have a backyard where you can meet people and be more COVID safe and all of this type of stuff. So I think it's a really, really tough issue.
Before COVID-19, many people, parents and students, took our public education system sort of for granted, and that includes the childcare of it. How do you hope our attitudes towards education and investing in it changes as a result of this moment?
Yeah, I think number one, we talked about digital divide. I've never seen more energy. The U.S. has actually done a pretty good job closing the digital divide in school settings. 10 years ago, when I visited a lot of schools did not have adequate internet connections or computers. Now, most schools, especially schools that are either urban or suburban, even in fairly low resourced areas, have reasonable devices in the school. But what COVID has shown us is the digital divide at home. And I hope coming out of it, we talk about these very heroic efforts that these districts and these cities and these philanthropists have been doing. I believe coming out of the COVID crisis, people will view the at-home digital divide as a human rights issue, that not having internet access and a device at home is like not having water or electricity or heating in your house. And so I hope, and I'm seeing positive signs, that when we, 3-4 years in the future, almost everyone in America will have access, and COVID will be the accelerant for that. So that could be a silver lining of this entire crisis. I think you have a whole generation of teachers that have been kind of thrown into the deep end on distance learning, but that will have positive benefits to it. It's suboptimal in the short term, but in the long term, they are going to be more tech savvy and going to be more willing to lean on various blended learning, video conference, whatever types of tools. I think you have a whole generation of parents who have realized that they have to get more engaged in their children's education. And, the reality is, even pre-COVID, I think a lot of families said, well, I'll just send my kids, I'll put them on the bus and then they'll show up and then, they'll get educated. And oftentimes it happens, but if as a parent, if you really want to make sure that your kids, doesn't fall through the cracks, you do have to be pretty engaged. You do have to keep track of what they're learning, help, tutor them when there's no other supports. And so I think that could be a silver lining, a whole generation of families that are newly engaged. And, there's also going to be some students that are going to discover through more independence in their learning that's a really important muscle to have, and that'll hopefully benefit them the rest of their life. And there's obviously these notions of that we were talking about earlier, competency-based learning, personalization, that will hopefully become more mainstream.
Some experts are expecting the pandemic to shift us further towards telecommuting in the future, even post-pandemic, and that could happen in education too. But you have said that you see a lot of value in in-person instruction, I imagine, because of the socialization of it. Do you think remote education is a sustainable way to do it? I mean, we are now seeing more and more evidence that this could go on for quite a while. Should we be setting up a more sustainable system of remote education rather than just dealing with the here and now of it?
Yeah, I think it's been a problem that from the, as early as last March, everyone's been treating this as like a month-long crisis, but then they keep they keep pushing it off. And when you treat it as a month-long crisis, then you never really solve it, and you just kind of kick the can down the road. And we're seeing that now. We're 5-6 months into the crisis, and this coming back to school is going to be pretty chaotic, and it's going to be pretty suboptimal. Frankly, folks haven't had a chance to really think through how the learning is going to happen. They've really been thinking about how do you socially distance, or can you socially distance, and stuff like that. And what I've told several government officials, and we told this in April and May, is like, you should think about this as a 2-year plan. Hopefully it's not, but what if it is? and you keep doing this 1 month or 2 months at a time, then even in 2 years, we're going to have this continued suboptimal solution, and people are going to be really frustrated, and you're going to have, the haves and the have-nots are going to diverge that much more over the course of 2 years. And, the writing's on the wall. This is going to last at least through this school year. And you don't hear a lot of people even saying that, even though it's somewhat obvious when you talk to the epidemiologists. Even if one of these vaccine trials are successful by January, and they've already started manufacturing some of them speculatively, it'll take to distribute hundreds of millions of vaccine doses. It's going to take months and months and months, and then before people feel confident to send their kids back to school. So this is a long haul. So people for sure have to be thinking about this systemically. I mean, to your question, I don't think pure distance learning is optimal for most students. I think it can be a very valuable thing for kids in rural areas who might not have access to certain schools or certain courses. It could be very useful for all students for parts of their education. If they want to take a certain elective, or they want to take something maybe their school doesn't offer it at a rigorous level, they can do that. But for me, the ideal is always a combination of using digital, distance, and digital doesn't have to be distance either. Digital can happen in a physical setting as well. But I think this crisis, the school that my kids go to, I'm on the board of it, and I've told them that, look, I think you have to reinvent the school in this world, and they already have done a good job. But like fundamentally, like maybe you unpack the models. Like, this is learning, this is socialization, this is the in-person guidance, in-person experience, sports, clubs, whatever, and you kind of offer an a la carte, and people make the portfolio of what makes sense for them, and that for sure makes sense in this COVID world, but it could make a lot of sense for folks post-COVID as well.
Sal, thank you so much for joining me here on Time 100 Talks. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch, Emma. Thanks for including me.
Thanks.